In exploring the history and the legacy of the Indian residential schools at the University of Minnesota Morris campus, it is important to understand the past, the present, and future expectations of these schools. We are fortunate to have Janet Shrunk Erickson, Acting Chancellor at the University of Minnesota Morris, who will summarize the lessons learned from partners in this work, and Jennifer Simon, Director of Indian Education for Minneapolis Public Schools, who will speak on the impact and trauma of these boarding schools. Chancellor Erickson.
Thank you. I want to begin this evening by offering a land acknowledgement with which we at the University of Minnesota Morris affirm tribal sovereignty and express respect for Native peoples and nations. The University of Minnesota Morris is located along Owabopte Wakpa, a place from which Dakota turnips have been dug river, on the edge of Mashkoda Aking, prairie land. This land has been cared for and called home by the Dakota people and later the Ojibwa people and other Native peoples from time immemorial. Our state's name, Minnesota, comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoche, the land where the waters reflect the skies. Acknowledging the land and our history in this place is an offering of solidarity with and respect for Native nations and peoples. And in doing so, we, the University of Minnesota Morris, reaffirm our commitment to our responsibilities rooted in the history of our campus site as a Native American boarding school, our distinctive mission as a public liberal arts college within Minnesota's land-grant university, and our federal recognition as a Native American serving non-tribal institution. My thanks to you all for the invitation, in response to which I have a two-part goal this evening. First, I'm going to try to provide you enough of the history of our campus site to explain the current work we are doing regarding the Native American boarding schools that operated here. And then I will summarize what we are doing and why, as well as the next steps we plan to take. After my part, as the introducer pointed out, we will hear from someone with much greater expertise than I have about some of the reasons why this work matters so much. So background first. 16 mission and federally operated American Indian boarding schools in Minnesota and hundreds across the country separated children from their families and attempted to eliminate Native languages and cultures, with intergenerational impacts still felt. The Native American boarding school at Morris was first known as the Sacred Heart Indian Mission. It was founded and led by Mother Mary Joseph Lynch of the Sisters of Mercy, and the first buildings for the Sisters boarding school stood on an approximately 200-acre farm that helped support the school. In 1896, a new Indian Affairs policy began to remove church-sponsored schools from the Indian educational system. Within several months, the federal government canceled the Sisters contract, purchased the Morris School, and made plans to expand. Under federal operation, the Morris Industrial School for Indians acquired new buildings and increased staff and its first Native American employees. Additional land was added to the farm, bringing the total to almost 300 acres. This land subsequently served as the West Central School of Agriculture, and much of it is still owned by the University of Minnesota. The Morris School was also one of the first 5 Indian boarding schools nationwide to close. In 1909, the federal government closed the Morris Industrial School for Indians, transferring the campus and buildings to the state of Minnesota. The federal legislation and corresponding state statute stipulated that American Indian students be admitted to future educational institutions on the site on terms of equality with other students and free of charge for tuition. This federal mandate has its roots in treaty law and has been University of Minnesota Morris policy since it was established as the university's public liberal arts college campus in 1960. It was also the policy of the West Central School of Agriculture, which operated on what are now campus grounds between 1910 and 1963. And for the last 3 years, their last students attended with the first University of Minnesota Morris students. Although so far as we know, only 2 Native American students attended that residential agricultural high school. So what else do we know besides this big history? The best source of information about the Native American boarding schools at Morris continues to be that produced by the late Bert Ahern, who was a professor of history and one of the founders of our Native American and Indigenous Studies major. His article, entitled Indian Education and Bureaucracy, The School at Morris, 1887 to 1909, was published in 1984 by the Minnesota Historical Society, and it's freely available online through them, or if you're interested, I can send you a link. After several conversations I had with tribal historic preservation officers last summer, however, I realized how little I had of clarity regarding what we knew about the boarding schools and the students who attended them, and what was actually documentable in our archives. Archival records, primarily from the National Archives and Marquette University's Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions Archive, indicate that many of the children who attended the Morris schools were from the White Earth and Turtle Mountain bands of Ojibwa, but other children were at the schools too, including from the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate and the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin, as well as Métis students from Canada and the occasional student of European ancestry, as in the case of one Irish orphan we know about. But I needed and did not have a year-over-year summary to share with tribal historians. And so our campus archivist, Steve Gross, worked with my new assistant, Jasmine Daly, who started in August, to create a detailed timeline that summarizes what we know and links to scanned images of the archival records we have access to. Most of these are simply copies of material in other archives. So in terms of primary information, there's very little that we have at the University of Minnesota Morris. The Stevens County Historical Society has some, but most of what we have is material that was Xeroxed, for instance, by Bert Ahern when he was doing his research. The timeline, still very much a work in progress, goes year by year and identifies what we know in terms of rosters and correspondence, things like that, that people can actually look at for themselves. And it has so far been shared with those people with whom I've had the most conversations. This includes the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or TIPO for short, and the archivist at the Sisseton Wahpeton, for the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. The TIPO there is one of our alumni, as well as the legal counsel for the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwa and the TIPO for the White Earth Nation. A central question, particularly in light of the horrific discoveries in Canada announced last year, has been, did students die while attending the Morris boarding schools? The answer is yes. Native Americans have known this really since the deaths occurred. It is not a surprise to them. And Professor Ahern's article specifically mentions student deaths at Morris. In addition, in the summer of 2018, archival research that included a review of local newspapers by a then University of Minnesota Morris students and a faculty mentor documented references to possibly as many as 7 deaths of children at the Morris boarding school in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Newspaper notices indicate that the remains of some of these children were returned to their home communities, but records uncovered so far do not document the disposition of other children's remains or locate a burial site on boarding school land. Working with the university's real estate office in Minneapolis this last fall, we had a GIS expert create maps to help us understand better the site history. And I will share a screenshot. Can I share? Let's see. I think I can share my screen. Yes. So this is one of the maps that we had created of the campus, what is currently the campus site. So you can't see the whole thing, but the current property goes much more broadly than this. And the Sisters of Mercy property is the blue line. This is the first school. And then the buildings that they built were there. I can't make it bigger without losing the resolution of the map. I tried. so that's the first of the maps. And then I think I can click on the second one. So this is the 1909 federal period. This is where it ended up. So 1896 is during the sisters part, and then this is the federal boarding school part. And they did a lot of building. So there are places you can see the dotted line outlines. And the land extends all off to the east. A lot of that was farmland. But you get a clear sense. And I want to note in the upper left-hand corner of this map, it says Cavalry Cemetery and Summit Cemetery. Can you see that? So those are city cemeteries that abut the university land. Yes. This is probably the most interesting part. And we can come back to those in Q&A. These maps too have been shared with the 4 tribal contexts I mentioned earlier. And the TIPOs need these maps as well as other maps. There are more maps that we are not sharing publicly because they include all sorts of infrastructure, but they need to know where things are buried, where sewage lines are, where power lines are, all of that kind of stuff. In order to consider any geophysical work, such as ground penetrating radar, that might be able to help us locate any unmarked burial sites from the boarding school period. Much of the land on which the campus now sits has been disturbed in the last century and more. Roads have been moved, buildings have been built, fill dirt has been brought in. 2, as I noted, a cemetery abuts campus, and it seems to have expanded over the years. The maps were shared as well at a teach-in we held on campus this fall on the boarding schools. It featured 4 alumni and another guest, all of whom work in fields related to Native American boarding schools. So we're trying our best to decolonize the research, to share it with those who have other resources to bring to bear on it, and to give them access to the material so that they can build on it. One of the questions that keeps coming up is, why haven't we looked for any unmarked burials yet? Why haven't we done ground penetrating radar? And there are a lot of answers to that, not least that apparently ground penetrating radar at the bottom of what was once Lake Agassiz is more complicated even than it is in other kinds of soil. I've learned things about what kind of soil we have here on the campus, for instance. I've learned a lot. With the guidance of our American Indian Advisory Committee and Dakota and Anishinaabe elders, our first step, though, was ceremony. In April 2019, the University of Minnesota Morris hosted a ceremonial gathering to inaugurate an era of truth-telling, understanding, and healing regarding the history of this land. It was a first step in remembering and caring for the children and their families and communities that have been negatively impacted by the boarding schools on this site and all those across Minnesota and the US. The late Mr. Danny Seaboy, a citizen of the Sisseton Wapatanoyate, led that gathering for, quote, remembering the children that were here, as well as the ceremony, quote, to fix it so that the people are happier. In October of 2021, we held our 3rd annual healing ceremony on campus, and plans are already underway for our 4th, which will be next fall, September, we hope. We also sought in 2019 to involve a tribal historic preservation officer in our next steps, but we found that their continuing commitments were extensive, and we were unable to advance that work before the pandemic. Since the summer of 2021, however, we have been able to move ahead again, and we have been busy. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. Back to this. This is the easiest way to see it is I have a list. See if I can make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So these are the things that we've done in the last, just in the last fall. We have gathered the information requested by our tribal contacts, the TIPOs and others, and created the maps that are necessarily prefaces to the next steps. We've provided information about, as I said, the kind of soil we have, and I continue to meet with tribal experts. Our work needs to be done as well-informed and in as well-informed and culturally appropriate way as possible. It cannot, however, be my decision to move ahead in any particular way. I'll give you a chance to look at some of the list. I and other campus leaders are guided by tribal nations as well as by our American Indian Advisory Committee. In particular, Dakota and Anishinaabe tribal nations and their interests and expertise are guiding our next steps. But tribal offices are in general not deeply staffed, and demands on them have risen with the national attention to boarding schools. Tribal nation priorities may not put us first. UMN Morris leaders respect tribal sovereignty, and we recognize the deep losses connected to this history and its continuing impacts on families and communities. So no action will be undertaken until we have guidance and direction from the tribes themselves. So what will happen next? I have sent messages to 14 tribal chairs and TIPOs following up on messages that I sent first last July. So I became acting chancellor July 1st. And one of the first things I did was send out letters saying, this is where we are and can we have your help? The next step from that was actually follow-ups from a number of TIPOs and legal counsel at different tribes who've been guiding the work that we've been doing. The messages, this most recent round of messages will be followed up with a phone call from Chip Beal, who advises me and serves as the director of our Native American Student Success Program. And we expect then to be able to develop a plan of action. Jamie Arsenault, the White Earth TIPO, has told me that I can follow up with the legal counsel for each tribe, for instance, if I can't actually do an in-person consultation with a tribal council, which is a challenge, again, not just because of timing and because we're dealing with 14 different tribes, but because of the pandemic, of course. So it would be a group of us who would travel and get on their agenda, including spiritual support provided, for instance, by one of our faculty, Gabe DeRosier. If I can gather sufficient input, and that's a big if, then I hope to have Jamie and another TIPO help guide what we actually do next, which may or may not include geophysical work. We greatly value the tremendous insights and guidance given to us by American Indian Advisory Committee, by the Anishinaabe and Dakota elders we've consulted with, and by the National Boarding School Healing Coalition, who the leaders of which have worked with us to better understand and remember our past here on the Morris campus, especially over the last 3 years. We have communicated with our campus community regularly about our ongoing research and consultations regarding the need for transparency on the U.S. history with Indian residential boarding schools, including those that operated on our campus site. And one of the key things that I have learned is to share more, but also to recognize what isn't mine to share. And that's a path I'm constantly considering. You know, can I share this? Is it mine to share? Or is this something that actually belongs to the tribes to decide what to share? So we've created a campus web page about the boarding schools that operated at Morris with some Q&A if you're interested. And I also want to stress that this isn't just about the past, which is why I invited Jennifer Simon to join me this evening. It's also about the present and the future in positive as well as negative ways. So we are still dealing with students, for instance, who had family who were at these schools. And at the teach-in I mentioned that we held in early November, our featured speaker is the descendant. One of his ancestors, actually 3 of his ancestors, attended the Morris boarding school. And it's a fascinating and sad story in relation to that. So it is something that, again, it's not entirely in the past. It's something that is complicated, fascinating, but also difficult. And we keep trying to figure out exactly the right way to go forward. We recognize that we have more work to do, and we are committed to doing things in a culturally appropriate way. And we try our best to keep our campus community, our alumni, and our students well informed about the work we are doing. One of the student organizations, the Circle of Nations Indigenous Association, I meet with regularly to keep them up to speed on the kinds of things that I am doing. And I am hopeful that one of the co-chairs of that organization will also be doing some McNair Scholar research on the information that we have around the boarding school students who were there in the federal period in particular. We recognize too that the social, emotional, spiritual, and cultural devastation from boarding school experiences have passed down to Native American individuals, to their families, communities, and tribal nations today, to use the words of the National American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And with that, I will, yes, I can share the stat. I have a picture. I think I just closed the picture of the grandmother water woman, but I will pull that up. One of the things that we have done on campus, and I can't even tell you how many different things we've done, but we have a fantastic statue in front of the one remaining boarding school, one remaining building from the boarding school period. So while Jennifer talks, I'll pull back up that photo so I can share it at the end. With that, I will introduce Jennifer Simon to talk about the impact and trauma of boarding schools on our youth today. Jennifer gave a version of this talk at the Teach-In in November, and all of the presentations were fantastic. I learned an enormous amount, to the extent that I hope that we can make this event something we do again. I was so grateful for the involvement of our alumni, who are many of whom are doing really interesting work in relation to boarding school history. Jennifer is a member of the Cheyenne River Lakota and, as was mentioned earlier, serves as the Director of Indian Education for Minneapolis Public Schools, and is a member of the University of Minnesota Morris American Indian Advisory Committee. Before earning her master's degree, she graduated from UNN Morris, where she was actively involved in basketball, as well as the Circle of Nations Indigenous Association, the Women of Color Association, the Minority Student Program, and she was really important in initiating the campus's American Indian Graduate Honoring Ceremony and offering of an honor song to all graduates at commencement each year. I'm very grateful for her willingness to join us here this evening, so I will turn things over to her.
Hilamiaye, thank you so much. Can we mic check? We're good. Can you all hear me good?
I can hear you.
Awesome. I have a lot going on in my house, so thought this would help. Hamitaki greetings, relatives, and petude chante washte na pe chiuza ba. I greet you all with a virtual handshake and a warm heart this evening. Jennifer Simon Imachi Apiye Washichu. My English name is Jennifer Simon. Lakota Chaje Mitawa Hinde, and I come from the Lakota Nation, as Janet shared. And so thank you for that great introduction. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. Are there any questions before I jump into? So obviously mine is really around students today and the impact on our community today. I know it's hard virtually. I'm a much better interactive in person. So darn COVID. All right, I'll jump right in then. Again, just following, I too always start my presentations with a land acknowledgement of where I am. I am actually, I stand today on the lands of the Mede-Wakantuan and the Wakpe Kute bands of the Dakota people. I myself am Lakota, as it was shared, but I want to honor the original people of the land that we stand on. So the map that you see, I hope you can see it relatively okay, shows the original inhabitants of the land that we stand on. So if you see the boundaries of Minnesota, this is Dakota homeland, this state here, and later on we had our relatives who were Anishinaabe and Ho-Chunk come to this land, but just wanted to acknowledge the original inhabitants and the fact that I appreciate you all requesting a presentation like this, because we all must interrupt the injustices that have happened in the past for our communities today, and that's how healing happens. So Wopila Tonka, many thanks for that. Just a little about me. Again, you heard I'm a citizen of the Cheyenne River Lakota Nation. I'm actually the Minikoju band of the Lakota Nation. I was born and raised on my home reservation. I am a descendant of boarding schools. My grandparents attended boarding schools. My dad is Lakota. My mom is German and French. And that's my family there at the bottom with my mom and dad. The picture you see there, the top picture is my Wakayajes. Those are my children. And as we translate children in our language, it's the sacred ones. It's the ones that, so people find that interesting sometimes of what we call our young ones, because they're the closest to the spirit world. They're coming from the spirit world. And so those are my two. And then the far left on the bottom is what I call my bonus child. He's my best friend who passed away a couple years ago, her son, and who stays with us. And so he's my bonus child. I'm an alum, a proud alum of U of M, Morris. Did a lot of work while I was there, probably annoying a lot of people with all my asks of why aren't we doing this and why aren't we, bringing awareness about the history of the place and that type of thing. And I currently work with youth. I am the director of the Minneapolis Public Schools American Indian Education. We have roughly just over 2,000 American Indian students within the district. And I proudly also serve on the American Indian Advisory committee for the U of M. So there's just a few things, a little bit about me. So just jumping into the historical, I don't want to go deep into the historical context, but these are just a couple things that I wanted to highlight before getting into the impact. And let me do time check on how long we have, just to make sure. I know I talk fast, but 15 minutes? Yeah.
That should be fine.
Okay, 10
I
minutes.
think.
I'll walk through it. Stop me if I need to.
I think we're good.
Okay. So in 1860, the reservation boarding schools, the idea was to use education to assimilate American Indians as a way of life. So, you know, it was to kill the Indian, save the man was the whole motto of boarding schools. And so, you know, to civilize us and to remove everything about us, our language, our culture, our being, our spirituality. It was actually against the law to practice our spirituality until 1978. And so, you know, there was deep intention of these using education as a boarding school. And what it taught is it taught the importance of private property, material wealth, this nuclear family that existed, which was completely opposite of what our communities was originally. You know, you weren't rich because of how many, you know, how big your house was, or how you were rich by the number of kids you had and the number of community that you had, your family around you. And so the teachings were completely opposite. In 1879, 60 schools for more than 6,000 children at that time. However, the reservation schools were not doing what they wanted them to, as they were still influenced by tribal values in life. So for example, if they're on the home reservation, they go to school to get assimilated in that school setting, but then they're able to go back home to talk their language, to speak, to practice their ways. And so what they did is they moved us off the reservations. And that's how places like the U of M Morris happened, was moving us far. As you heard, Turtle Mountain was a primary reservation. That's 7-8 hours from that home reservation by car. You know, imagine what it was by horse and buggy and train at that time. And so thinking about that, that was deep intention to why to move us. And so they removed all our tribal ways in our hair. You know, they cut our hair, they took away our language, that we were beaten for. And this was my grandparents' experience. So I don't want to make it seem like this was so long ago. You know, that impacts us today. And then in 1978, ICWA, which was the Indian Child Welfare Act, and also when we were allowed to practice our spirituality legally, was in 1978. And they passed the law that gave the parents the legal right to deny their children from attending these off-reservation schools. So that's 2 years before I was born, right? 1978, wasn't that long ago. I have an amazing team that I get to work with, and a lot of the work we do is creating professional development for teachers, for people to understand the historical context. And what you have in front of you is a visual. And I know it's really tiny, and I can share this out if people are interested in looking more at it. But I really just wanted it to be a brief visual for you all to see the number of policies in all those years, starting from the pre-1800s to today, that have impacted American Indians in education. So these are specific policies for education, okay? That's a lot. And again, this was intentional. Most of them pre-1980 were really 1990, were to remove everything about our people and assimilate us to, like I said, kill the Indian, save the man was the entire theme of them. So just transitioning on all that and all the policies that have existed, what's the impact on our youth today? There's psychological effects on boarding school students today. Grief of leaving home, the difficulty in transitioning to a new school environment. We see this very heavily in our students who are transitioning schools from elementary to middle to high school, who are creating in a new environment. They worry about the effects of scholastic performance after boarding schools, the crisis situations and cries for help, the experience of the emotional abuse throughout boarding schools. These are all lasting trauma. There's difficulty integrating back with the family and the community after leaving, going to boarding schools and coming back, of this feeling like I don't belong in my home community, speaking my own language, and I also don't belong in the white community, in the assimilated community of education. There was a huge loss of culture and language. My grandma shared stories about being beat for every time speaking Lakota language. And how traditionally the only time we cut our hair is when we're grieving. And so children, they would cut their hair, and all they could think about, many of the kids would think about, well, who at home died that I don't even know, because the only time we cut our hair is when we're in the grieving process. And so they were very confused. And so it resulted in, community disruptions. And then when our kids were taken from us, there was no visual learning of parenting, of how do you parent a child? How do you learn from watching and learn from doing, right? That's how those of us that are parents, that's what you had to do. There's no book for parenting, but our families weren't able to even have children around. So that didn't exist in the community. So again, just going to the personal and individual impact on our youth, we see a lot of kids, loss of identity. I worked in higher education for 20 years before I transitioned to pre-K 12. And even I would have college students, 18, 19 years old come in and say, well, or as I'm meeting them, like, well, I'm not Native, but my grandmother's Native. And I would be like, how are you not Native if your grandmother's Native? And they would say, well, I'm not a member of my tribe. As if that was the only thing. And that's what this government does to us, is they say you have to be a citizen of a tribe in order to be Native. You have to be a quarter blood quantum in order to be Native. Different messages that are coming from the federal government. So students would come in and I'm like, oh, honey, you're Native. Like, if your grandmother's Native, you're Native. But it's the system that has been created. And so that loss of identity is still today. Our kids who are blonde hair, blue eyes, some of them have been raised within it and they are very proud and like, no, I'm Native. And others haven't been raised in it because of the genocide that's happened and the teachings to assimilate communities to not want to be Native. And so there's a lot of that identity issue. Obviously that plays into your self-esteem, the sense of safety and unhealthy life choices based on parenting, abuse, things like that, that are real in all of our communities, but they're also real in our Native communities. Excuse me. Difficulty forming relationships. This has to do with lack of trust, or and I personally can speak to this, seen it throughout my community around, forming relationships are really challenging as far as close relationships, because it's hard to trust people based on everything that has happened to our people. It's really hard to trust, and to know that people really care. And then it obviously affects our mental health and addiction. So these are some things that we're seeing today with our family and familiar structure, loss of parenting power, the extended family system is destroyed. So for example, in my language, we don't have words for like aunties and uncles. We have Unchi is our matriarch of the family. It's our grandmother. And then we have Ina and Lekshi and Tui. And what that means is like my mom and my other mom and my other dad. It's there. We don't have so our extended family was very broad. I grew up in a household with 14 people in a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, and I thought that was normal because I grew up on the reservation, but learned growing off that, there's, that's not the structure that, is like, quote unquote, the American dream that's sold in society. And then we have our parents, mental health, addiction, depression, abuse. It's just unbalanced life. And then we have the unemployment and poverty that exists, not just on our reservations, it's in the urban area as well. So this is the impact of the historical things that have happened. I think oftentimes people think about, we talk about like, oh, Native people, we have so much abuse in our community and we're alcoholics and there's all these stereotypes that are out there about us. And don't get me wrong, like there's the real issues that exist, but we don't talk about why those exist. We don't talk about the historical trauma that has happened for generation after generation after generation that has led to that. And so our youth today, again, so going back to our larger communities and our tribes, similar things, loss of language, that sense of community, loss of culture, ceremonies, traditions. Some of our kids have never been through ceremonies. I was fortunate to be raised on the reservation with all of our cultures and traditions. Many of our youth are not. And so they're really learning what that means and who they are. And I put this note, you'll see there's a couple pictures here that over 70% of Native people live off the reservations today. They're living in urban areas. And so we oftentimes, people might think like, oh, all Native people live on the reservation or they live in a specific area. And there's lots of reasons for that too, intentional reasons of removing us, but 70% live in urban areas. Excuse me. So now I go into data, a little bit of data, and this is just to show a few slides, because we see the effects of this trauma every day in our school systems. We see it in our outcomes. And this doesn't mean that our kids are not smart. This does not mean that our kids are struggling. Excuse me. It means that the system has been set up for a population that was not ours. It was set up for population to assimilate us. And so you'll see on the left-hand side, our American Indian population in special education in the district. Geez, I need some water. Excuse me, sorry. I'm talking too fast. So our district is 17%. So you'll see at the very bottom on the far right side, 2021. The district, 17% of our students are identified as getting special education supports, while 28% of our American Indian students are identified receiving special education supports. Similar on the right-hand side, we're looking at our population of American Indian students who are identified as homeless and highly mobile, meaning they are staying with a relative, staying with a friend, don't have adequate housing. And we see this a lot in urban areas in particularly. It's so expensive to live in the urban area. And so you see there too, the district, is at 6% of our students are identified as homeless or highly mobile, where 16% of our American Indian students. So just a couple data that I wanted to share. The other thing is attendance, and I go back to the trust of the education system. It is how it and why it was started has not changed that much today. And so you look at our attendance at you'll see the black line there is our American Indian students. So they are the least likely to attend school every day. Okay. One of the things that we don't, I appreciate this graph again, we put it together, my team of people. As we think about education, we think about boarding schools, so that's the then column. And we think about education system today, and that's the now column. And I don't think we reflect a lot on the fact that it hasn't changed very much. And so considering the education system has not changed very much, it's no wonder why American Indian students, students of color are the lowest in most of the data, especially in the state of Minnesota, for any of you that follow education closely. So we think about it. Then, forced attendance, that we were removed and placed in boarding schools. Now we have truancy, discipline, behavioral, suspension. Then it was mostly white educators. Now it's mostly white educators. A lot of them who just don't understand where we're at as a community. or the historical trauma that has happened. You know, boarding schools, our cultural practices were removed. Now, a lot of cultural practices are not included. Very, very, very rare to find American Indian people in the curriculum of K-12 education. And I would say also college. So these are just some things, you know, a lot hasn't changed within 1800s to 2022. This is a video, I won't go into it. This is a video I shared at the presentation as well. I can put the link in the chat for people just because of timing. I won't go into it, but it's a great short clip that just talks about as a community how we still remain strong, practicing our ceremonies, and as a people that we still remain. And so I'll put that in the chat. I forgot I should have I meant to take this slide out, but it is a good video, so I'll share it for you all. But and I'm happy to share my contact information as well for anybody. But you know, happy to answer any questions or have some reflection. And otherwise, Wopi Latanka, Piramiaye or Pilamiaye, and or Miigwech if you are Anishinaabe or know any Ojibwe.
Thank you, Jennifer, from me for going through that. And the video is really very much worth watching. It's a wonderful video. And I'm not tired of hearing you go through all of that yet. So maybe I'll keep yoking you in to do this because I think it provides such important context. Before we turn to questions, I'm going to do the one thing that Julie asked for before, which is to share the image of the statue that is on our campus. This is the grandmother water woman statue, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Jennifer, can you pronounce it? I realized I should know how to pronounce the Dewey Goodwin's name of it, but I can't. So it is Nokomis, Nibii, and yeah, it's grandmother water woman for me.
And that is Ojibwe language, which I don't speak. So I'm not
I thought
sure.
You might have been well practiced, though, more than me. I can do Miigwech, and that's the limit. But it's a wonderful statue. It's huge, and what's really important is the building you see in the back right. That's the sole remaining building from the boarding school period on campus. So that was the boys' dormitory, and built at the end of the 1890s, and it is there that the Native American Student Success Program is housed. It's the Multi-Ethnic Resource Center. And I think one of the most powerful things about this campus is that we are now teaching students Anishinaabe language on campus. Students can take Dakota on campus, although they have to do it by way of remote instruction because we don't have a local instructor right now. But it is, I think, immensely powerful to have those things in place on offer on a campus that the same site where language eradication was once a fundamental principle of the education. So this statue also talks about that. And you've got the two children. So one child in the boarding school uniform on the left, a little boy looking one direction, and then the little girl on the right in a dress hiding and looking back. Mm. So the past and the future together.
Well, thank you very much, Janet and Jennifer. It was an excellent presentation. And I have to tell you, I watched today fascinating PBS program on the possibility of losing the Ojibwe language. And I want to know, probably Jennifer, I would ask most, do you have any affiliation with the immersion schools or first language speakers?
I do. And there's in particularly, there's an immersion school in Minneapolis called Badote that was started about 4 years ago. And that's one in the local area that is an immersion school. It offers actually both Dakota and Ojibwe for K through 8th grade. And so that's one that started a few years ago. There's another one down on the Lower Sioux Reservation that is very active, and that's a pre-K through. So it's getting our youngest learners. It's an immersion with Dakota language. Unfortunately, first language speakers in the state of Minnesota, when it comes to Dakota, there's 2.
Oh,
We lost several during COVID. Actually, Danny Seaboy from Sisseton, who did the presentation and ceremony for us in Morris, we lost him through COVID, and amongst many others. And he wasn't even in Minnesota. There's more first generation speakers in South Dakota where I'm from. There's several on my home reservation that are Lakota language. But when we talk about Minnesota Makoche, which is Minnesota, there's 2 living today. And so everyone else are language learners. And so that's what we have today is all of our youth or anyone picking up the language, whether it be Ojibwe or Dakota or Ho-Chunk or whatever language, many are language learners because there's not a lot of first language speakers still living.
And can I follow up quickly on that too, that one of the things that we have a Native American Serving Non-Tribal Institutions grant from the federal government, the Department of Education. And one of them is focused on teacher education and trying to create, obviously we can't create first speakers, but we are working hard to try and get language competency certification as part of teacher education so that we could help build a pipeline for students, Native American students, and any students who are going to be teachers who are more fluent culturally, and then if possible, linguistically.
okay. And Julie has a question here. Do you advocate for a separate educational program for Native students and with intermarriage of cultures, Native with non-Native over the generations? Does the connection to cultures of each marriage partner diminish? Big, interesting question. Okay, who's gonna?
I'm going to let you try, Jennifer. I'm not sure I can answer that question. There are a lot of people I would call, if I had phone a friend, there are a lot of people I would call to ask this question, but and I think one of the things that really is important is a lot of the work we've done on the campus to try and educate people and give them access to education. So we do get very quickly, we do get students who, as Jennifer said, don't really feel a connection to their Native American ancestry until they come to the campus. And then they start taking classes and getting involved in cultural events and learning about it, and they change over that 4 years. And to my mind, it has a lot to do with education. Jennifer, I'll pass to you.
Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, this is a tough question because I think I feel torn, right? Like I personally, if all of our education systems, education programming, education would integrate and understand Native people and the historical trauma or events that have happened, then everyone would be learning together. And that's the ideal. But what happens is we don't get that. And so the Native students become separated and not attending and not wanting to be there because they don't feel represented and included. And then we have the data that we see, an example of it this evening. And so ideally, I always say what's good for Native kids is good for all kids. Like we should be teaching all of this to everyone. It's not this, oh, let's do Native programming for the Native kids. Like if we would just do hands-on learning and differentiate our learning styles for our classrooms and do all of these things for all of these kids. And so so it's a hard question because ideally, no, having separate programs, but unfortunately, we have to because we're not seeing it in the education programmings. Well, people will say like, oh, we do after school programming and we do summer school programming. And I'll ask how many Native families are attending. And they'll be like, I'm not sure. I'll pull that data, and it's like, if we're not doing that intentionally, and we're looking at that to see who's attending and why they're attending, then we're doing in my opinion, we're doing a disservice to our entire community. Because what I see is students who are not Native are more interested in learning this stuff than our Native kids. Like, they're like, how come I was never told this? And this is college and K-12. And so that's a tough question. And the other question, with intermarriage, I can speak to that, me speaking Lakota language myself, and then my second partner being non-Native. For my daughter, her dad is Black, and so like we couldn't speak Lakota language in our household because there was a lack of understanding. So like my kids and I, but then there was that, so that it makes it more challenging. Now, do I say there's a less connection? Maybe, maybe not. It just meant that I had to be more intentional about them, and they don't know it like I want them to know it, like, in all honesty, the language. But so that's my own personal, so I do think it impacts it, but there's ways around it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, from West Volcanot, are there any post-secondary institutions in any of our neighboring states, the Dakotas, Iowa, Wisconsin, that have similar roots and current tuition practices with Native American students as Morris offers?
I can answer that quickly. No.
Oh!
In terms of universities, there is only one other university in the United States that has a tuition waiver like the University of Minnesota Morris tuition waiver, and that's Fort Lewis College in Colorado. They too are built not right on top of a boarding school, Native American boarding school, but right adjacent to a Native American boarding school. So that is part of their history in a way that is similar to our own history. And we are the only two schools that have that mandated tuition waiver. There are, as you may know, you may have heard announced earlier this fall, there is a new University of Minnesota scholarship program, Native American Promise scholarship, that will provide free tuition for some Native American students. It's different from ours in that it is limited to enrolled members in one of Minnesota's 11 federally recognized tribes. And it is tied to family income. And it is the sort of, it has other restrictions, whereas the University of Minnesota Morris and Fort Lewis tuition waivers are much less tied to what are artificial, obviously, state boundaries when it comes to tribal students or students who are members of tribal nations or not officially, as Jennifer was saying. We look at ancestry. We even allow students in Canada to come on the tuition waiver. So the short answer is no, there is no place like us.
Well, good for you, Janet.
Well, as I said, it's been in place since 1910. So it has a long history. And there were even two Native American students who attended the West Central School of Agriculture, which was the residential high school that predated the university campus.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I must thank both of you. This was.
Deanne, Paul has a question.
Oh, what is that?
Scroll down. Paul did submit a question.
Okay, let me see here. I'm trying. I can't get down there. Oh, from Paul. Oh, yeah. Alcohol addiction is a problem that also disproportionately affects the Native American community. How does this affect the educational opportunity for Native American children? I don't know. Sounds like a Jennifer question.
And I don't know that I think that's one of the challenges with all of these, with our community and the historical events, is it's so complex, right? Like, it's historical events that have happened that impact our community in different ways. I mean, we see it. It's a real issue, and it impacts our parenting of our families. It impacts, I was talking, I had a student lose their dad, and their dad had just come out of recovery from drug addiction. And prior to that had come out of, being in jail. And so like for this child, they had lost their dad like multiple times throughout their life due to impacts of just the society, of this trauma that we've experienced as a community. Not his dad's fault. Like that's one of the challenges that oftentimes people look to, like, oh, well, if Native people were stronger, and oh, if like they just, go to recovery, and like I hear the craziest things. So like if like blaming us, right? And it's like, do you even understand what has happened? Like the fact that we're still here is like astonishing based on what we've all been through. There was forced massacres. Largest hanging in the United States happened in Mankato. Like the Wounded Knee massacre from my hometown. Like there's been intentional massacres of our people. They infected smallpox, blankets with smallpox, and gave them to us to kill us off. Like, which is why, this COVID vaccine, a lot of Native people were like, I'm not going to be the guinea pig, like where a lot of them were like, no, I'm gonna. So like there was tension of that. So I think it does affect our kids. I mean, just the systems in itself, the higher rates of Native people getting locked up in prison, the higher rates of us, having even opioid addiction because of all the trauma, that's reality. Like all these things affect our kids today, and to nobody's fault, but how do we work through them to support our kids? Like that's really the question of, we're not going to fix the issues that have resulted from all this trauma, but how do we create systematic structures where we're able to support our kids so that they don't continue in this cycle? So, oh geez.
Okay, here's another question from Julie. Is your Native student group active at Morris? What is your hope for the future?
I'll answer the first part, and the other one was tagged for Jennifer. I'll give her a few minutes to think about it. And is our Native American student group active? Yes, very. I will say that one of the most wonderful and challenging simultaneously features of Morris is how active our students are. They are super engaged. They are, in general, not everyone obviously, but they're interested in social justice. They have voice. They're on every committee. They're really engaged. And I think Jennifer was one of those as an undergraduate when she was at Morris. As we noted, she was instrumental in helping us move forward, getting us the honor song at commencement. We also do an honor song at orientation now in the fall. The current Circle of Nations Indigenous Association leaders, they haven't been quite as, I haven't met with them quite as often as the ones who were in place previously over the summer. They're the ones who initiated a petition that got a lot of national attention about finding any unmarked burial sites. We were already working on it, but it has also brought a lot of attention to the matter. And they care, and I admire them for how much they care, and they really want to work hard to make things better. So they are, last I heard, also one of the big events they plan is our annual spring powwow, and it happens in April, and it's open to the public. We would welcome people to attend, especially if the COVID pandemic has eased a little before then. So we hope. So all right, Jennifer, have you had 2 minutes to figure out your answer?
Jennifer is speaking Lakota here when she says sheesh, right? That's a deep and complex question. So what are your hopes for the future, Jennifer?
I think the biggest, when it comes to this, is that, people understand like that there's an awareness brought of not trying to fix a community, but trying to understand so that we together, this is not going to be something that Native people change. And it's not going to be something that a small group of people change. It's going to have to be advocacy at all levels for funding as a state level, for understanding, having Native people in the legislature right now, and having that's making drastic changes to bring awareness about Native people today that never existed before. So I have a hope today that I didn't have a couple years ago. But my hope is that everyone wants and understands that our education system did not tell us the truth in a lot of the things that we learned, including me that was born on, grew up on a reservation. Our education system and our textbooks tell us what they want us to know, and there's a lot of hidden truth, especially from narrative of people of color and Indigenous voices. So that's why I appreciate so much when people like yourselves are asking for conversations like this, is because that gives me hope that you want to learn to change the world that we're in. So thank you. Pilami.
Well, thank you both, Janet and Jennifer, for a most enlightening presentation. That's all. See everybody in a month.
One morning I woke up and I heard my brother crying. He was screaming so loud you thought someone was dying. "Mom, Dad," he screamed, but there was no use trying. They weren't around. I ran outside and saw he'd had a pretty bad crash. His bike was in the ditch, down his arm a bloody gash. He looked so pitiful, just sitting there in the dirt amongst the trash, crying, "I want Mom and Dad." I picked him up and started running toward my uncle's up the way. It started raining and got real dark. He could barely tell it was day. My brother cried and asked, "Sister, where's Mom?" I didn't know what to say, when the truth is, I don't know. When my uncle saw us coming, he ran into the yard. He took my brother from me and he held him in his arms. When he saw my face, I could tell he was alarmed. And he said, "What happened? Did you fall too?" "Uncle, I'm so tired of wondering why. Why do they drink? Why do they do drugs? Why do they leave us? Why?" He said, "Sister, it's hard to explain." And I said, "Uncle, try." And then he told this story.
Once this land was teepees as far as you can see. The water was clean, the land pristine. We were where we were meant to be. Then strangers came across the sea and brought with them their disease. Our people cried and prayed and sang, but it brought them to their knees. Imagine that your family, and most of all your tribe, what if most of everyone you love suddenly got sick and died? And before you even had a chance to bury them and mourn, the strangers came and took away the land where you were born. And you wondered if your parents even cared as they stole you and your brother away, or if they'd been so beaten down they had nothing left to say. And then at school, they cut your hair and beat you if you spoke. The language that Creator gave our people when Earth awoke.
We will rise up from the darkness. We will overcome the pain. Warrior spirits live within us. We shall remain.
Sister, I'm not trying to tell you that your mom and dad are okay, or that they are not responsible for the choices that they've made. But you see this bloody wound on your little brother's arm. If we don't clean it, it won't heal and it'll do all kinds of harm. Those deep wounds of our ancestors still bleed within our hearts. When we remember all they've done, that's where the healing starts. So every morning when you wake, you pray this prayer out loud. Creator, help me live in a way that would make my ancestors proud.
We will rise up from the darkness.
Don't you forget this. You can be anything you want to be.
We will overcome the pain.
Just work hard, never give up. Perseverance is the key.
For your spirits live within
Strength, dignity, honor, that's all in your family tree. So hold your head up high and know that.
We shall remain. We will rise up from the darkness.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
We will overcome the pain.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
For your spirits live within us.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
We shall remain.
Little brother, we will rise up from this darkness. Little brother, we will overcome the pain. Remember, warrior spirits live within us. We shall remain.